You became a top leader while raising a young family. You dealt with being a female leader, never easy in an organization. What could be a good tip for all those people right now that are dealing with a similar situation?
The $24 million question. What I say to the younger people on my team is that
Few leaders shift from CFO to running product, innovation, and operations for a global index powerhouse and make it work. Well, Cameron Drinkwater did. Her story reveals how top executives rethink their identity, take intelligent risks, and build cultures where people feel safe to stretch beyond their comfort zone. She also breaks down the habits from coaching to athletic discipline that keeps her performing at a high level while leading a 500-person organization and raising a young family. So believe me, you don't want to miss this episode. Ready? Let's go.
technology, though, and AI has really lit a fire, I would say, under organizations and how we think about retraining and development. It's existential in many ways. Organizations are adapting to the world around them, some more successfully than others. It requires the ability for some of your best people to be willing to go into the new thing and make it successful. And so that started the practice of risk-taking and mobility, I would say. Is once you make mobility accessible and training development available, you then need to create space for failure, the psychological safety to take risks and have them not work out and not get kicked out of the organization.
You as a leader, how do you bring this to life with your people, with your team?
Oh, great question. So look.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to a new episode of the World Class Leader Show. Today, I have another amazing guest that I was really looking forward to interviewing, and her name is Cameron Drinkwater. Cameron is the Chief Product Operations Officer at S&P Dow Jones Indices, where she's responsible for innovation across the entire product lifecycle and the modernization of delivery through automation, digital transformation, and AI. Such a cool role, actually, such a good title that she will tell us more about in a second. But prior to leading product operations, Cameron was S&P DJI's, which I think is the abbreviation for Dow Jones Indices Chief Financial Officer, where she led global financial operations and strategy. She also previously served as a head of corporate strategy, always for S&P's DJI parent company, so S&P Global. I'm going to get lost here at some point, where she led integration management office for S&P Global merger with IHS Markit and was responsible for S&P Global enterprise strategy and growth initiatives. So Cameron joined S&P Global in 2019 as head of strategy and merger acquisition for S&P Global Market Intelligence. You know, prior joining Global, you held leadership on several business-to-business information service companies, including DMGT PLC, Thomson Reuters, and Genscape. What a great career. And most importantly, Cameron, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
You have such a big role, and we'll have an opportunity, of course, to talk about it. But what really struck me from, your profile, but also the conversation that we had together when we met in the first place, that clearly you have held, some of the most strategic roles, but your journey really that it didn't start there. So you move really across very different worlds. Finance, operations, now product, and even the industry, and also different scale. So in one simple question, although it might be a very complicated answer, what really was the driver for you of all about these transitions?
It is a great question, although I don't think it's that complicated in my context. I was fortunate very early in my career to have a great mentor who said to me something along the lines of, the easiest job someone will offer you is a job that looks just like the job you did before with incremental responsibility and scope. And he warned me very early on, don't take those roles, because it just becomes a double and triple checking of the same box on your CV. And he said, think about where you want to go. Think about the boxes that public company board or hiring manager would look for in that role, and make sure that every next role you take checks a new box on your CV for that, end goal. And so that's actually been a really North Star for me in how I've thought about new roles. The second piece to his advice is probably equally important. He said, every new role should, of course, check the new box, but it needs to also pay you fairly and be something that you genuinely can have fun doing. Once all three of those are met, take the job. And that's actually simplified the decision-making quite a bit for me. And when I have a new opportunity to stretch and pivot, and I know we'll talk more about that in the session, I look for those three criteria. If I can check, I go for it. And that has, taken me in a whole bunch of different dimensions, but has also unlocked really great step up and role expansion opportunities for me that I think if I'd been a bit more methodical or linear about my career wouldn't have come to play.
What I love about this is you have one, a mental model and framework to operating from, but also then you have clearly articulated, first identified and articulated your criteria, your factor for getting a new job, and then, be at your best. And it sounds like this is such a great formula. And I'm sure there are so many people out there that at the moment they are considering, job changes, or maybe they got an opportunity to get promoted, but maybe they're unclear, they're not sure whether it's the right direction. So that is already a great point. But also, there is something there, in my opinion, regarding your ability to adapt. Because, I mean, to one point, yes, it's incremental and it ticks the right boxes, but also requires, anyway, every single time a level of adaptability. And I suppose a level of risk taking, which I know is something that is very important for you, isn't it?
And look, I think early on in my journey, carried a lot more anticipatory stress about my ability to adapt. And, doing is learning a little bit. I've proven to myself over time that I can. But maybe reflecting on it, I think early on, I focused a lot on the skills or capabilities that each new role required that I didn't have coming in. What I've learned to do, though, and what I maybe have pattern recognized over time, is that my superpowers are consistent through every role that I take, and they tend to be what makes me successful in the role, even if it's a different superpower than my predecessor had. So I'm very strategic. I'm very change oriented. I bring a lot of energy and optimism and drive to roles. And that compensates for what I lack in the functional skill set of whatever I'm taking on. And, I'm a quick learner. I love to learn. And so over time, I pick up the skills I need, but it's those kind of foundational superpowers that enable me to get by until I have the functional skills, if that makes sense.
Let me expand on, this notion about consistency. Are you referring to a consistency of your kind of an operating system, or consistency more of your best possible behaviors, or to get most out of your strengths? So how do you apply the word consistency during a moment of change in your career and your responsibilities?
I think for me, it's being very clear about where I have differentiated expertise and relying on the team where I don't. And
Got
so
it.
I know what I bring new to roles. As I said, strategic operator is a bit my brand, change agent. I'm willing to make changes and can make decisions quite quickly to do so. But I'm also hyper aware of where I'm not the expert. And what has enabled me to be successful is being very curious, very learning forward. I'm relying on experts and expertise where it exists already in the function or business. And really complementing those areas or domains of expertise with the things that I know I'm good at. And that for me has been the formula for being able to have immediate or very quick impact in new roles, while also not falling trapped to faking skills that I don't have.
It's great. So you are authentic, living and operating with authenticity. Now, I think, the audience that are listening or watching this episode at the moment, possibly they'll start asking, why did you move from a traditional financial role with all the experience that you have? So that includes, all analytical skills, financial, structure, all of that. In now what you lead product and also operation, which seems to be so different, especially in the traditional way of thinking roles in corporates. So first of all, why? And I know you said before, I have my own criteria to move from one place to another, but what is in behind that choice of moving from finance to operations? And what you think has been, so that's question number one. And second, what you think has been the most critical shift that you needed to make mentally in terms of starting operating in such a very different domain?
Great two-part question. So I loved my role as CFO. What I loved most about it, though, is that it gave me a 360-degree view of the whole business. Because I controlled the purse strings, I could sniff around in everyone's backyard, and what that gave me was time to really learn the business inside and out. What I struggled with is that as I started to learn the business, I had ideas that I wanted to implement about how it could grow or where the industry was going. And to take action on those, I needed to be more in the nucleus of the business, in our product and operating centers. And so for me, it was just a very natural transition when those roles became available to pick them up. And then, I could get my hands dirty in the stuff that I was starting to get conviction on the broader space, as well as what our customers were looking for from us.
So that's great answer, and to me that says a lot about your approach to, and that's also courage, but also your approach to leadership. On the other hand, I mean, even myself, I changed few jobs in my whole career, and one possibly I had kind of a one big jump like you did in terms of change. And I remember the one of the mindset that I had at the time was something like, will people will appreciate me as a leader in a very different domain based on my previous experience? Or will people really accept, although I'm not a functional expert, as you said, I will be accepted, I will be listened, I will be able to drive. Especially, and by the way, I don't know whether that was your case, but for me, I was also one of the youngest actually of the entire team. So I was big jump, and I know there might be something there for you too. So how did you approach this? So mentally, how did you approach that change? What kind of inner voice you had? How you face, with that reality or maybe perceived reality?
Great question. So I have a framework here and then just the practical side of it.
Right.
So another framework I use often and was other advice I got early in my career was when you're making a big stretch, you can change your function or your domain, but don't do both at the same time. So by that, I mean, when I was CFO, I understood finance as a function, but the business of indices was completely new to me. So I was capable in the finance domain. I was stretching massively into a totally new industry. I learned the industry, and then I was able to stretch in a new functional area, product and operations, while having a degree of expertise in the domain. And so that served me really well. I think when people try to change both at the same time, one of two things happens. A, you don't get the job because people rarely hire someone that's completely fish out of water. But second, your credibility factor is like zero, right? If you know neither the domain nor the function, it's really hard to gain trust and credibility with your team. And so that goes just back to the practical. And yes, like you, I've typically been a very young leader in these new roles. And so for me, what's always been kind of paramount is coming in with humility. I come in and openly acknowledge what I am and what I bring to the table. But then, really starting to figure out in the team who's open for business. So, who is receptive to me being a leader. That's not universally true ever. And then second, where are the domains of expertise that I have to partner with deeply? Because either they know where all the bodies are buried or they are critically respected in the function that I'm leading. And those two have served me really well. Identifying those kind of key leaders and building trust and relationship with them as a priority has always then helped pave the way for the broader cultural change of acceptance, and letting me in to a point where, as I said, some of the things that I know I'm good at can start to shine.
Yeah, that's great. And you already touched on culture. I'd like to go back on culture because I know it's an important element of any organization, really, but it's also important for SAP. But just to give people context, tell us a little bit more, even if it's a minute in, what's your role specifically? What's your intended outcome of your role? How many people you're leading?
So I lead currently our product, R&D, and operations business functions. So within S&P Dow Jones Indices, there are basically three main functions. There's our commercial sales organization, there's our technology organization, and then there's mine. And so I am responsible for everything from product innovation with our R&D and product teams through the delivery and ongoing operational maintenance of those indices. And indexing was, a mystery to me when I came in. It's maybe a bit of a niche in the world of finance, but Fundamentally, what we do is create rules-based investable product solutions that give product issuers, whether those are asset managers or banks, a transparent and independently managed by the index provider way to create passive investable strategies for institutions and consumers. So some of our headline indices, which you would know, are the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones Industrial Average. But we operate almost 1 million indices in calculation. And so we do much more than those two. But what excites me, what gets me out of bed in the morning, is the fact that indexing in many ways makes accessible to the masses very sophisticated and often expensive investment strategies. And that science and math has proved out over the long term outperform active or more expensive alternatives. And so I get very excited about the idea that we bring these high quality ways to invest and save for the future to institutions and retail investors globally. And that's, very, very fulfilling for me and my team.
Yeah, I totally get it. So, and how many people you're leading in your organization, Cameron?
Just about 500.
That's such a big number. So, well, super congratulations, of course, of your career, your success, and what you're dealing with. So, you just mentioned about the importance. You said as well when we were, chatting before recording, the importance of culture for you personally, but how is also critical for delivering performance, which has to be. Meaning, I truly believe culture has to be in service of performance, not culture in service of having a nice environment just to stay together. So you also said that I'm sure many other people have experienced in SAP, how SAP has a great culture and how that drives performance. Could you tell us more in terms of, you've been quite, long time in the company. How would you describe the culture that exists in SAP and why is so relevant for driving performance for the organization?
It's interesting because, I've been here almost 7 years, but in the context of S&P, I feel like a newbie to this organization. And I think maybe that speaks to the culture, which is, we are over 100 years old, and there is a fundamental belief in this business that you can have many careers within the perimeter of S&P Global. And further, that we believe that we can train you and adapt you to have many careers here and be successful. And so how that manifests is, I would say, two main things. One is we have a very learning and development forward culture that we cultivate ourselves. So many of our leadership development programs and training programs are fully in-house run. But that means we control the types of leaders that we shape and what skills we deem are important for them. The second is that we really encourage mobility. And I think I'm, a function of that. I've been moved around quite a bit, some of it through my own, election, and some of it because an opportunity was proactively presented to me. But I would say that's very culturally normal here. You tether that to high performance, though, and I think one very important requirement for high performance is once you make mobility accessible and training development available, you then need to create space for failure, the psychological safety to take risks and have them not work out and not get kicked out of the organization. And S&P does that very thoughtfully too, both by their performance culture, which rewards risk-taking as well as delivery, but also by demonstrating that we have things that we take flyers on that fail, and those people do not leave the organization. They get moved on to their next opportunity. And so it's this culture of recycling and growth that I think is really unique, actually, in the current market context.
So you think that, by the way, to me, that's just fantastic to hear. I work with a number of organizations, and my whole experience has been, really ups and downs in terms of what kind of environment I found. In psychological safety, I cannot say there's been always in place. And by the way, I had the opportunity to have on the show Amy Edmondson, the mother of psychological safety, and we spoke a lot about the idea of risk taking and courage to drive that. So psychological safety is not just for make sure people are get hurt, but also to drive new ideas and then creating an environment of risk taking, which is what you're pointing to. So it sounds like you are really culturally in the organization embracing psychological safety in the right way. So to me, that it's really music from my ear. Um, do you think has been something that's been always in place, or you notice like there was a shift, was kind of a deliberate shift coming from the top, and that was well represented by the leaders? So, how do you think some of the key cultural performing factors they got revealed or they get embraced by people? Because I have my own idea. My idea is more about viral phenomenon. It's not like something that you can mandate. But what's just been in your experience of shifting culture to where it is right now?
It's a great question. And I do think organizations are adapting to the world around them, some more successfully than others. And so I think of S&P as being on a journey that I see reflected in the outside world as well. So if you look back kind of 10, 15 years, we had a lot of pride and heritage, but not a lot of mobility. And our leadership at the time, particularly as we started embarking on a more acquisitive and dynamic portfolio management growth strategy, which was very topical for the years post financial crisis, where financing was cheap. Our leaders took a very thoughtful approach to how do we integrate people into the culture? How do we make those integrations successful? And often that's through mixing the right people, right? People coming in new and people who've been here a long time, blending those cultures successfully and very organically. But that requires the ability to move people. It requires the ability for some of your best people to be willing to go into the new thing and make it successful. And so that started the practice of risk-taking and mobility, I would say. And, technology, though, and AI has really lit a fire, I would say, under organizations and how we think about retraining and development. It's existential in many ways for two reasons. We're not Meta. We're not throwing multi-million-dollar pay packages around. And so how do you attract and develop enough talent to meet the AI opportunity in our business? And where we've come around is that, of course, we can hire and acquire some talent, and we've done that, but we have to bottoms up train our people to be AI native. And so that in and of itself has also spurred a entirely new phase of training and development approach and expectations of our people that I think is really only the beginning, but very exciting.
That's great. Absolutely great. Great to hear. Now, do you think is your approach to risk taking is a function of the culture on SIP, or you had always, a specific attitude toward risk taking?
A chicken and the egg. Look, I am clearly someone who had an orientation towards risk taking and stretching myself very early on in my career. So that wasn't always that was apparent before I came to S&P. What I would say though is, as I've gotten more senior, and as you get more senior, the stakes of doing that get higher, and S&P has encouraged and reinforced my best inclinations as I've gotten to more senior levels. So for sure it's something I was, innately inclined towards, but the organization itself has drawn it out of me and maybe even fueled it a bit.
Yeah, totally. And I don't think it's a surprise that you work for SAP, meaning, so personally, I feel like that I've seen with many clients of mine too, is when there is such a strong disconnect between the environment where you're operating in and who you are, and that goes back into your own identity, which is not only about attitudes and behavioral patterns, is also related to who we are and what we stand for and all of that. So when there is such a big disconnect, at some point that gets surfaced and you cannot operate anymore in the same environment. So I think it's not a surprise that there is, right, there is that level of alignment with yourself, with the organization. Talking about, taking risk, but also talking about leadership and development. You you told me that you really value coaching, for example. For you, has been always a critical component or who you are or you want to be. Tell us more about coaching, because so many people they're still considering coaching like fixing one, or I don't need coaching, I know enough. So why coaching is important, has been always important for you, and what you think as well has helped you become, if there is one or two major takeaways of your coaching journey.
Oh, great question. So look, culture is formed for me by the daily practices that add up to how we do things, right? How we get things done. And coaching is the ultimate, for me, mirror or very bright flashlight on what the leader is doing to build and reinforce culture. I'm a big fan of therapy. I'm a big fan of coaching. I'm a lifelong athlete. And so, a good professional coach is like a good therapist. You and they need to have similar views on what works and what you're solving for. But when you find that alignment, a good coach can be like a trainer to an athlete. They just continually evolve and nip the practices and behaviors into, as close alignment with your definition of perfection as you're striving for. And it's been for me that continual evolution and shaping that my coach does with me that I think has made me into a much stronger leader.
That's great. I'm sure. And I recognize that. Meaning, by the way, for how many years you had a coach?
So I have had coaching on and off for the last probably 7 years, but I got my best coach a year and a half ago. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. And that, I think, speaks highly about your coach, but also, how much you care about developing yourself and keep, working on yourself. In the context of SAP, how do you think that coaching works in terms of creating? I mean, you mentioned before, psychological safety is one of the most important cultural, features, let's say, in SAP. You care about risk taking. So you as a leader, how do you bring this to life with your people, with your team? In other words, what has been your new leader? Not new, but what is your leadership style? What is the anchors of your leadership? How you bring this to your team, given that you have such a large team to manage, although I'm sure it's not directly 500 people, but you have a huge responsibility of leading people, right?
Of course. And look, I lead to cascade, right? So part of my job, I set the standards, but then I have to help the teams under me figure out how to cascade it in a way that is authentic and resonant to them, right? What I do may not be perfect for them. But I think, two things I focus on a lot. One is rewarding and reinforcing the right behaviors. And the second is proactively growing and stretching talent in a way that keeps the talent culture fresh. And so I'll give you an example just of the first. Last year, we had a big initiative on LLMs. I think most of the world did. And what we were striving for was bottoms-up adoption. We wanted our people using our in-house LLM, and we were measuring usage quite frequently. And 1 week last November, my team was the number one using team of our in-house LLM across S&P Global, so 35,000 people. And this was a 1 week measurement. It's not enduring. It could be viewed as just a one-off thing. But I decided with my team to make a huge deal of it. We sent emails to everyone. We called it out on town halls. We gave spot bonuses to the highest users within the team. For Christmas, we sent everyone, not expensive, but a tablet to play around with AI in their home. And these were all things that were symbolic ways to say, we see you. You did exactly what we asked you. Yeah, you did exactly what we asked you to do, and we're rewarding it and reinforcing it. And I think for me, these are the ways that you build and shape culture in a way that's very forward and that is tangible for people. It's not just words. It's very, they know when they've done it. Does that make sense? And then on talent stretching, one thing I've learned to be very thoughtful about is who I pick first matters a lot. So where I stretch and move people first sets the tone for whether it becomes a movement or something that I'm pulling teeth to try to sustain. And so success for me has come when I've found people who are culture carriers, who are well-liked generally, but who also are viewed to be on the up and up in their career. And if I can get them to stretch into a totally new role or take on very new and expanded responsibility that is perceived as maybe risky or less comfortable, they set a standard, they model a behavior that cascades without me having to do anything else. And then it tends to catch on like a movement where other people volunteer or sign on or want to be part of what the first person's doing. And that for me has been a really critical way for how culture change becomes lasting, because you need that talent mobility through a team or a function to make it pollinate, if that makes sense.
It does. And I'm pretty sure your team broadly, 500 people, they will have a very high level engagement for, I think, what you shared in terms of some example, how you apply leadership, So kudos to you. Well done, Cameron, because to me, these are such a great example of great leadership, really. So to me, it makes a lot of sense. So well done. Now, if we look at the other side of what people don't see, I mean, that's what people see, you in action as a leader in the organization. But also there is the different part of you and many other people out there is dealing with their family, dealing with their own personal issues. All of us have the same, because we are humans. There's no any other, there is, we're just human. We're dealing with life. So, and for you, that is also important because you became a top leader while raising, a young family. So you dealt with being a female leader, never easy in an organization. I'm sure it is in S&P, but unfortunately, still hear a lot of bad stories how female leaders can really, scale up their role and their accountability and responsibility in organizations. So there is an element of that, but also there is an element of being a mother, meaning dealing with, personal issues and dealing with the fact that you can always be available. You have another life, at the same time. First of all, how, what was for you? I mean, what could be a good tip for all those people right now? They're dealing with a similar situation. And also, if you tell me a little bit more about if it's true, this element of guilt, people in your position say, oh, I should really be at the office today, but I can't, or I should be there, but I can't. So how you're dealing personally with all of that?
Whatever, $24 million question. So look, what I say to the younger people on my team is that just like work is a team sport, having a family is also a team sport. And the single most important decision you will make is who you want to spend your life with and raise a family with, because that will determine a lot of things about the balance of responsibility or the load that you carry. Even if you have an amazing partner and an amazing home partnership, which I'm fortunate to have, parenting is exhausting, and parenting with a full-time job is like next level. So it is not easy. I think I always struggle with the guilt phrase because it implies this like false expectation that you should be able to do both in extremes. And you clearly can't. You're just a human. What my husband and I talk a lot about is getting the mix right over seasons. And just as it is not good for your family if you always prioritize work and do that full out, it is equally not good for your job if you always prioritize your kids and let your work come second. And so I try to think of weeks and months and quarters as seasons. And over time, you need the mix to be balanced, where family flexes and work flexes, but it is irrational to think you can flex both at the same time, and to not recognize that sometimes work does need to come first. And that's not just a day, that's a week, that's a month, that's a entire M&A deal cycle, whatever it is. The most important thing is that you're consciously flexing back in a seasonal way. And I think the other thing that kind of goes unspoken a lot is the dynamic of your partner's career or life. And what gets really hard is if you're in the same season at the same time. So both of you are flexing hard at work at the same time, and family is kind of second. And so there's a great book actually called Couples That Work, that my husband and I read very early in having a family, and I give to all of my team members. But it's about recognizing the give and take and the communication that's required for a healthy marriage to survive a dual career household. It's not easy, but I do think if the communication is there and the willingness to ask for help when you're both in, say, the same season is there, anything is possible. And I do find, I honestly say I am a better mom because I'm a full-time employee and career. I'm committed to my career than I would be if I were just a full-time mom. Because when I'm with my kids, I give them my full attention. And when I'm at work, I give it my full attention. And for me, that balance is what fuels me. It gives me energy in life.
Oh, such amazing approach, really, Cameron. And what I take out of it is that you have been very intentional, and you have included your partner in the same conversation, because I think that is also important. You said it, but I think I want to amplify what you said, because doing this in isolation without a partner conversation involvement, it will never work, even if you're in season, because it will never understand fully where you are. So that's, to me, is such a great really strategy and approach to living a healthy life in a context of business. The only question I have for you, though, is I totally get it. I love this idea of the seasons. Equally, at least what I see in my experience, and I think it's going to be very different from yours right now, is companies are really fighting like crazy at the moment, meaning the level of work, the level of pressure, the level of stress, the level of, you name it, has increased for a all very valid reason. So is that still possible? Start thinking about season in an environment where every day is a priority. Every day there is something that is becoming a priority. And I'm not implying that's the way how you work, but that is more in terms of the context of the business right now.
I think it's incredibly real, right? And one mental map I've always had is that, of course, yes, this has gotten worse over time, but the job can always expand to fill the time you give to it. The job will always take. And so the only person who can set boundaries is you, for yourself and for your family. When I think about seasons, it's about sometimes I flex my boundaries because the job really requires, but you can't flex all the time or else you have no boundaries. And just as communication with your partner is really important, communication with my team is really important. So when I am willing to flex a boundary, so a boundary I've set, for example, is I like to walk my kids to school on Friday mornings. I commute to the city. I have a 2-hour commute. So I'm gone before they wake up Monday to Thursday. But Fridays, I work from home and I like to walk them to school. Now, occasionally there's a meeting that cannot be moved and I will flex that boundary. But I definitely don't flex it every week. And I'm very intentional when I agree to flex the boundary. And so I think it's as important for teams to have a leader that is predictable in their boundaries as it is to have one that sets them in the first place, right? And when my teams, I don't think mind that they can't reach me all the time, but they would find it very frustrating if they didn't know when I could be reached, right? And so predictability in your boundary setting and consistency in as much as possible when you're cleaving off family time, I think helps the whole ecosystem to work in a more fluid way.
Yeah, that's great. And talking about adapting to to the business request and still living the right life at personal level, which something that we haven't necessarily spoken about is the health, how the health factor plays inside all of that. And we all know how much is important to protect our mental health, also protecting our own time and boundaries. And that clearly, triggers a thought about you, because something that you also share with me, that you have an athletic background. So you said a little bit earlier, so for you sport has been always very important. So I'm sure that your experience as an athlete has shaped who you are right now, not only as a person but also as a leader. What do you think is always been the major learning from, or lessons from sport that you're now applying in business, in a way how you lead, in a way how you really live your life at the moment?
It's a great question because I think for a long time I viewed, I was a Division I athlete in college, and I viewed that part of my life as completely separate from my professional career. Like, that time is done, and now I'm in my career era. And I actually had a speech coach that I started working with a little over a year ago, who gave a huge unlock for me, because he started talking about game tapes and this concept of voice recording myself giving public speaking delivery, and playing it back for myself, and using the game tapes to fix my performance or my verbal cues or whatever. And this started a snowball for me of thinking about how I would train and prepare for athletics, being how I train and prepare for each day at work. Now I view them and my practices incredibly consistent. I think about bringing a lot of what made me successful as an athlete into my day-to-day. And that is things like repetition and voice tapes and training. It's things like breath work and visualization and making space for mindfulness. But it's also things like coaching and feedback with my team that use in any team dynamic. And so actually, it's been really fun for me to feel like I'm training again, but I'm just training for my career, not training for my sport.
Do you actually visualize the meetings as well? So how the conversations, I think it's a little bit easier if you practice it to visualize what could be, for example, a big speaking event, right? But when it comes more in, because then at the end of the day, speaking events in a way or another, you still have maybe once every time. But meetings being always in a very high stake conversation, that is actually the day-to-day thing. Have you ever applied, visualization inside of meetings?
I tend to do them in like micro doses. We all know, our days are very, very full, but when you have a difficult or very crucial conversation coming up. And so I try to build in kind of 10-minute windows at some point in the day before that conversation, not only think through my main points, but then visualize how they're going to respond to those points and how I might respond to that. It's like practicing a play for, an athletic event, right? The reality never goes exactly as you practiced it or as you visualized it. The other team always has some, curveball to throw. But for me, it's like I've built in some agility into how I'm going into the meeting already by having a sense of how I want to pivot. And so anyway, for me, that's been incredibly helpful, because I find myself getting thrown off balance a lot less by having just put a little bit of thought into the what if, and then type of scenario planning, which I just do by visualizing the conversation.
Brilliant. And I think the what if scenario planning is very, very useful. So, by the way, I think what you're pointing to is something that many leaders are not able to do, because you're right. The time is so limited. So get prepared for whatever conversation you have next is always a challenge. So, for example, I know it's difficult to do, but to me, there has to be always 15 minutes before calls, but at least 15 minutes to prepare for the next conversation, to get the most out of the conversation, because every conversation matters, because that's the only tool that we have as a leader. We don't have any other thing than conversation. So
yeah, and maybe to push the point a bit, what I've found is if I do have back-to-back meetings, I will show up, I'll tell them, but I will show up 5 or 10 minutes late to make sure that I get the moment of pause in, because I will have a more effective conversation if I'm ready for it winging it by just showing up ready to rock kind of thing.
Oh, there you go. Look, I'm not a professional athlete. I'm semi-professional. So I'm coming from the tennis world. And tennis is such a great lesson because it's an individual sport. You might remember what the top tennis players used to say is, for example, that's always been my learning, for example, from sport, was always try to reset every single time that a point is finished. Because if you start getting bogged down by whatever point you just missed before, then it's going to affect how you're going to show up next one, right? And in business, it's such a perfect thing because how many times we are stuck in conversation that maybe they're not what we respected. Maybe there is somebody said something that we didn't like it. And I know it's difficult again because we're humans, but being able to jump in a conversation with a clear mind, clarity in what you want to do, clarity how you get prepared, has really a foundation for success. So Cameron, sounds like you are on a perfect track, and I'm sure your previous athlete experience has really shaped you. By the way, would you mind to say what was your professional experience that you had before as an athlete?
A springboard diver. But no, I love that tennis analogy because you've probably experienced this a million times. You know right away when someone's bringing their last meeting into your meeting. You can feel the energy right away, and it sets the tone of the conversation off right from the start. It's so important. That reset is a very powerful analogy.
Yeah, because otherwise we are stuck with our own perception about whatever is happening right now. And that brings all the emotional reaction to conversation, which is the last thing that we want to do if we want to have a powerful conversation with other people. Cameron, that has been such an incredible and amazing. I really enjoyed this conversation. So people, where should go is on LinkedIn if they want to just get in touch with you, learn more from you, connect. Is that the right thing?
Yes, please. Yeah, LinkedIn is perfect. And I'll often post when I'm going to be at events. So I'd love to meet people in person. But yeah, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you for sharing, your experience, your story, and sharing your level of authenticity. So Cameron, thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrea.